Welcome then to the I think it's the 52nd episode of our webinar series on COVID-19 by health professionals and for health professionals. Now then, before I introduce our two old lags, I'd like to introduce a newcomer to this series, and it's a great delight to have Professor Walter Ricciardi, currently the Professor of Hygiene and Public Health at the Università Cattolica di Sacro Cuore, I think, in Rome. But he's not just a prolific researcher and academic and scientist, highly active in health policy, president of the European Public Health Association, and indeed is the advisor to the health minister of Italy for the COVID emergency. Walter, I notice that your minister is called Roberto Speranza. Doesn't that mean hope?
Yes, indeed.
Good. That's a hopeful sign, and he looks very young as well. I have to say as well, he is very young. Okay. So now then, as well as Walter, pleased to meet Professor Trish Greenhalgh, who's been our guest several times. Now I notice, Trish, you've just passed 100,000 Twitter followers, which I think anything over 40,000 makes you a celebrity. So you're moving towards Kim Kardashian territory.
Absolutely.
And finally, we have Peter Openshaw, Professor Peter Openshaw, who's a regular of the show. He's become the kind of Walter Cronkite of the emergency now, the trained, trusted media voice across the media for everything that they, and indeed most of us, don't actually understand. So welcome you all, and this is the catch-up round that we do, where we pick up on questions that we haven't picked up before, and in each month we have around 1,500 of them. So my apologies, we will be using those questions, but I don't have them by your name. So if you recognize one of the ones you asked, you should now be gradually congratulate yourself. But now then, what we start off is a quick round of desert island papers. And this is where we ask each of you to produce one paper just to talk about that you've liked or not liked. Indeed, somebody wants to produce the paper that they hated, just to talk about, just for a little bit of time, for something that's happened in the last month or so that has excited or depressed you. So I've got you on screen, Trish, so that probably means that you're ready to start.
Yeah, well, I love this idea of a desert island paper, because one of the things I would do on my desert island is actually read some of those papers that I've put aside, which are obviously very well written, but I haven't actually had time to look at yet. And top of my list is a paper in the European Heart Journal by Peter Libby, who's from Boston, and Thomas Lucia, who looks like he's got a link to Imperial. And the reason that the title of the paper is COVID-19 is in the end an endothelial disease. And one of your lovely technical people is going to put the picture up, because the reason why I like this paper is it's got beautiful pictures in it, really nice graphics. So look, I'm not an endothelial person at all, but I think we all know that back in March, we used to think of this as a disease of the lungs. It was a sort of acute pneumonia type thing. And we talked about respirators and chest x-rays and coughs and breathlessness. And actually now we're moving into the sort of long COVID, which of your organs has been spared rather than which has been affected. You can see down the left-hand side, you've got all these horrible things happening to your tissues. And then down on the right-hand side, you can see the pictures of the organs and what happens to the organs as a result. So the detail is beyond me. I'm waiting to get onto that desert island. My son actually lives on a desert island. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll see lots of tweets from him. So when I go there to see him, I'm going to take this paper and read it properly. How's that, Simon?
That's beautiful, as is the paper, and good luck with your son. Indeed, he's leaving the island soon, isn't he?
My son? Yeah. No, he goes off to collect supplies from time to time. No, he's still there. He's doing all sorts of interesting things. Yeah. He's a marine biologist, actually, but that's for another.
Oh, I've confused him with the other one. That's right. Yeah, the doctor one.
The other one, yeah.
Okay, so Peter, what's your desert island paper?
Well, there's so much to choose from. It's a very exciting time in terms of publications. I really was spoiled for choice. I was wondering whether to talk about the recovery trial, which has shown that steroids are so effective. Great British trial, of course, but I thought I'd instead go for the solidarity trial, which is the World Health Organization international study, an enormous trial with 30 different countries enrolling patients. And I think they've got up to something like over 12,000 patients. And they were basically testing a lot of different things that people thought might be effective. Now, remdesivir, antiviral properties, hydroxychloroquine, and interferon and lopinavir, and it showed absolutely that remdesivir doesn't help. Hydroxychloroquine and interferon, those limbs looked like the mortality was actually a bit higher, and the lopinavir, wasn't significantly different. So the reason I like this one is that it shows the power of the trial. Lots of things which we thought might be helpful, and which we can now firmly stop giving patients and avoid poisoning them. So that's a great way to improve patient care, is to actually, do these trials and stop them when we don't. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, Walter, I don't know if they have desert island discs in Italy, but you get the concept. Something you'd like to take to a desert island with you to keep you interested for the next month. What paper are you going to take?
Actually, it's not a paper, it's a book, which was just translated into Italian from the original English language. It's just Richard Horson's last book. It's the COVID-19 catastrophe, what's gone wrong and how to stop it happening again. Because, I'm an Anglophile, that Italy was the first country to be hit by COVID-19 outside China. And I clearly remember that time at the end of February when I tried to speak with all my colleagues all around the world in warning them about the risk of this disease. Well, we look at Bergamo, people dying literally, and we weren't able to take care. And we warned most of our colleagues around the world, but that was a problem to do that in the UK. And Richard described exactly those days. And I was shocked because, as you know, England and UK has some of the best public health epidemiologists, clinicians in the world. And I really was shocked to see what was happening on the London Underground, on the soccer match taking place without any kind of caution. While, for instance, we were shocked by the fact that Atalanta Valencia in Milan was a major source of infection. So that reminded me those times, and I still think that our collaboration has to be improved and international collaboration has to be improved.
Okay, well, Richard Horton, if he's listening, will no doubt enjoy that plug for his book. And for those of you who are followers of him, he's going to be our guest in conversation later in the year. So there'll be plenty of opportunity there. Could I just also mention to people that we're not taking, sorry about that, we're not taking questions today, because otherwise this is a catch-up on questions and it will just get more questions and it will never end. So I'm going to stick with the questions that have been asked before. All right then, now then, I don't know if you how well you know Professor Openshaw, Walter, but he certainly in this series, he's been not normally a smiley type person. I have to say that. And he actually smiled earlier on then. That's really good. And I just want to quote, Walter, really on that, that you tweeted yesterday, Peter Pio, who's one of our fellows, and said, you tweeted him yesterday, and his quote is, "There are still hurdles to come, but November 2020 looks set to be the month that humanity develops the tools to turn the tide against this devastating virus." So let's start with a bit of speranza then. What do you think about that, Walter?
No, I think this is correct, and also the way in which this is happening. I remember that after Donald Trump in the United States made a deal with the AstraZeneca and Moderna, we were shocked by the fact that this was a purely commercial approach to the vaccine. So that essentially the United States bought in advance some millions of doses only for the US population. So we met in Europe with the ministers of health of Italy, UK, and France and Germany, then underlined the importance of vaccine as a public good. Then, unfortunately, something happened, it's called Brexit, and UK get out, and the Netherlands joined us. So what we did was an inclusive alliance. And this really paved the way for the 27 member states to do this kind of approach. You can imagine the difficult in drafting a contract, all the aspects, but at the end of the day, in the European Union, now we have this kind of approach. So buying vaccines not only for Europe, but for the Balkans, for Ukraine, and also for Africa. And this is something which I think is remarkable.
Thank you. Now, I've been affected by the phantom lawnmower, which just ridiculous, but it's happened again. So there may be a little bit of trouble with the background noise today. I'm really sorry about that. At least my dog isn't here. Okay, so others want to come in on this. You know, is this hype really? Come on, or is this really such a moment? Peter?
No, I think it is really exciting. I must say, I was very, I was pretty miserable a few weeks ago because I couldn't see what end there was in sight. And then the news started to come through about the vaccines. And I think whatever we think of the individual trials, you know, what we're seeing is several trials reporting that it is possible to stop this one with vaccines. And that's remarkable. You know, we haven't been able to stop HIV, TB, malaria, despite massive amount of investment. And this one, you know, within a year of knowing about the virus, we already look like it is going to be possible to intervene with vaccines and to have a big effect, at least in developed countries. I think there's all sorts of challenges, but you know, let's stick on the positive.
Trish, the same thing then? I mean, Johnny Bell told us that this could all be over by the spring, but then we heard he's a Canadian and spring is a long time away in Canada. What do you think? Over by spring?
No, I think this is going to, I mean, right at the beginning, I was on an email group and we were talking about whether this was going to last 3 months or 6 months or a year or whatever. And someone said that they'd done some modeling that said the whole pandemic was going to go on for 17 years. I hope it's not going to be 17 years. I would say it's going to be with us, a bit like HIV is still with us. But I think it's going to dominate our lives probably for another couple of years. It's my but I don't know any more than anyone else, really.
Well, you're here then, but you know a lot more, as you well know. Okay, but it does mean we're going to have to talk vaccine, and we should indeed be doing so. So let's take a few questions on that. And one question that we got when Jeremy Farrow was on was that everyone is assuming this will have to be repeated annually. Is this still a given, or might it not be the case? So, who wants to take one? But Peter.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the moment, what we're saying is that people who've been naturally infected look like they're protected for at least 3 months and maybe 6. You know, my own guess as an immunologist would be that actually we're going to get slightly longer lasting protection than that, but we haven't had enough time to really work this out. The immune responses that are being generated by the vaccines are usually at least comparable and sometimes greatly exceeding the immune responses that we can measure after natural infection. So I think—
Just say that again, Peter. Just say that again.
Yeah. So if we look at the antibody responses and we focus on the antibodies that are most highly correlated with protection, which are the antibodies to this receptor binding domain. So the spike protein's got this receptor binding domain on it, and we can measure antibodies to that bit. That's the bit that correlates best with protection, with neutralizing antibody. And it looks like the vaccines are inducing antibody responses, which are often maybe 4 to 10-fold higher than natural infection. Some of them are more comparable to natural infection, but you know, if that's anything to go on, my own hunch is that the vaccines are going to give you protective immunity, which is longer lasting than natural infection. So if that's the case, and we have to wait and see because this is a new virus, I think the prospects of needing an annual vaccination are quite likely, but it's also possible that we wouldn't need to vaccinate for 3 or 4 or 5 years. You know, that would be conceivable.
Oh, gosh, that's another smile. This is getting to be a record for you. Okay,
Yeah.
Walter, do you want to come in on that? What's your view?
Actually, I'm a little bit disappointed by the fact that the manufacturers are, informing us via media and not via official, papers or submissions of file to the EMA or to the Food and Drug Administration. So we really know only a very limited part of information. So as soon as we can reply, and I hope that it will be soon, because yesterday I was on a Prime TV show, and I was told that President von der Leyen said that we can start to vaccinate in 15 days, which is impossible, so that even if the president of the commission, which is a colleague, says so, I think that you can imagine how people are, confused. So that's why I believe that the sooner they submit the files to EMA or FDA, the best we can reply, and also the more transparent we can be with the people.
That's actually another question that came up about this news by press release. So Trish, can I get you? I'm sure we'll have views on this. Well, everyone will, but it is noticeable that we're getting that, isn't it? We haven't actually seen very much. Do you think this is an important issue, or just that we should just be pleased that we're getting press releases?
I think it's an incredibly important issue, but I think it's so difficult for the researchers. And although I'm from the University of Oxford, I'm not closely connected to the people who are developing the Oxford vaccine, but also there's other vaccines. I did a pre-record radio program yesterday all about the relationship between the media and science. And it's very easy to slip into a narrative that the media are doing something underhand, doing something wrong, and also scientists have got a bit slack. It's not nearly as rigorous and robust and all those words as it used to be. On the other hand, I think some of the most incredible sort of steps forward in this very complex pandemic have happened because the media have been alert to innovations and ideas, and also framings, different framings of how things work. I mean, so, the investigative journalists have really done very well there and led the field. Now, against that background, I think one of the things that's happened is that we scientists have got our act together better in terms of how we engage with the media. So the Science Media Centre, for example, every day I get an email from them, I'm sure Peter does too, saying, like, these are the papers that have come out today, will you comment on them? And so there's sort of real-time peer review. So it's not just that there's a headline pops up or there's a press release been released, it's also the whole process of the dialogue between science and the media. Now, against that background, what we have in all these vaccines is preliminary data. And the question is, obviously you don't dig up your potatoes before they've grown. You can't even look at your own data until there's a proper cutoff point. But then you look at the preliminary results, and then you have to say, well, are we going to keep these completely quiet, or are we going to put them in the public domain? And you can see the pressures that have been, particularly on the Oxford team, when actually 2 other vaccines have come out, let's have a sneak preview of your data. Something was produced. And then, of course, they're crawling all over it. Financial Times this morning are absolutely crawling all over 2 paragraphs, saying, well, this doesn't look quite right. This is a bit flaky. So I think we have to recognize that we are in unprecedented times. And right now, we have just got to wait for the next lot of data, is what I think. I'm not a vaccine person, but it looks like there's some pretty good positive findings, and there's some slightly concerning findings. But it could all change massively when we get the next tranche of results.
I think that's very well put, and I think actually we should be fair, because we might have a little go at the media slightly later on, but actually in general, most of our main outlets have been having, as we might say, a very good war in trying to do the best they can to produce good, accurate data. What's it been like in Italy, Walter?
Pretty much the same. So essentially, some of us have become celebrities, in the sense that people wait for our, response every day. What is going better is going, and this can be also dangerous, because some of us who are not competent, unfortunately, most of them clinicians, lie to the monster of the numerator. So there are some clinicians that, for instance, have made people relaxing during summer. The virus has disappeared. There's no more masks. Go back to your life. And people look at these doctors and say, oh, if doctors say like that, I'm going to disco, I'm going to beach resort, I'm going to do the same. And this is dangerous. And it's difficult to explain that they are, of course, very good anesthesiologists, they are very good pediatricians, but they are not epidemiologists, they are not public health people. Now they say, you were right, but this is dangerous. So we have to start a new phase of collaboration with clinicians, with public health people, with epidemiologists, but also with media.
I noticed that you were on the front page of, was it La Repubblica or Messaggero or something yesterday? So you're clearly becoming a public figure yourself, and it's good. It's good that you are. Good that you are. Okay. Well, still on vaccines, because we did get a huge amount of questions on this, and this is the fact that, building on your point, Trish, that people now surely know far more about vaccine than they ever did before, and now. I don't exactly think it's, people are discussing it over the pub, should they reopen, but people know there are now different types of vaccines, that they're not all the same. And Peter, when you were undoubtedly influenced by my wife on the Today program yesterday, you brushed off the fact that people would want choices. People just would take whatever vaccine they were offered. But I wonder how true that is. Will it not be the case? There'll be some people who say, I'll have this Oxford vaccine, but I'm not having that American Bill Gates stuff, things like that. Do you think that could be happening? I'll pick up on Trish, actually, from general practice. Trish, do you foresee that will now become a problem? People will actually want choices, and can that ever be accommodated?
I've never seen it before. I mean, there's all sorts of different kinds of vaccines, for example, for hepatitis, but I've never seen someone come in and say, I want that one rather than that one.
I agree, you've never seen it before, but as you said, it's unprecedented.
I don't think so.
No.
I think what we've got here, although this week, the differences between the vaccines are all over the papers, they're all over social media, and this one works that way and that one works the other way. And this is a polymerase chain reaction. Next week, they'll be talking about something else. By the time that vaccine is there, and it looks like it may be distributed partly through general practice. I mean, when I was a GP, we used to have this cardboard sign and we put it up in the window of the surgery. It said flu jabs are in. And you wrote it on a bit of cardboard, and as people walked past, walking their dog and things, they'd see flu jabs are in, and they'd come and they'd make an appointment, or in fact, it was a drop-in session to have a flu jab. That is the level of reality, I think. It's going to be, what we're moving from is a situation of no vaccine to a situation where you can get a vaccine. And I think that's, for most people, that'll do, and they'll trust us to give them a vaccine that has a reasonable chance of working and almost no chance of causing them harm.
Okay, hold that thought, because I'm going to come back to you on general practice. Does anyone else want to come in on this issue of choice, that when the chips are down, it'll be fine, basically? I think that's, Peter, that's what you were saying. Walter, do you foresee any problems in Italy, perhaps, or around Europe?
Actually, my fear is that it's already happening, that some clinicians or some infectivologists is saying, there is a difference between a messenger RNA vaccine and an adenovirus shuttle vaccine. So essentially, for the first time, we are providing immunization coverage via the provision of a genetic information. So I think we have to be clear and to explain, because, for instance, an infectious disease, a very important infectious disease expert yesterday said, I could have some side effects in 10 years because of this, but I'm going to do the vaccine. But if, somebody very expert in the field says something like that, I can imagine that people can be disoriented. I think it's very important that immunologists and vaccine people explain first to us and then to people what's the difference between an mRNA vaccine and an adenovirus vaccine.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's very easy to get drawn into the trap of being desperate to say something new when you appear in the media. And I think we have to be consistent with our messaging. And I mean, to my mind, if something has been through all the regulatory processes and has been approved for use after full disclosure of all the information, then I'm very happy to be injected with it. And if my GP rings me and says, come round and be vaccinated, I'm very happy. I don't really mind which vaccine it is, as long as it's been down all those official processes. I mean, in the UK, our own GP service is gearing up to be able to deliver vaccines within the next few weeks. I think this is a bit unbelievable that it's going to be that fast. We shall have to wait and see what the regulators say when these portfolios are properly debated and considered.
Hold that thought on, it's a bit unbelievable. One other thing that is this, Trish, coming back to you. Now, GPs were not really much involved in test and tracing, were they? A huge other system was set up. Now we're told they're going to be really involved in delivering the vaccine. which I think is great, but been set up to fail here? Do you think you can do it?
Well, first of all, I'm not anymore a practicing GP. I'm a full-time academic, but yes, one of the things that the GPs have been exercised about for many years is the chronic underfunding of general practice, and also the sort of the slippery slope where more and more things that used to be done in secondary care get transferred to primary care. So GPs were overworked, burnt out, all that kind of thing before COVID. But also, and I think this is highly, highly relevant, we have a demographic time bomb of GPs, particularly the ones who are working in deprived areas, many of whom came over from the Asian subcontinent sort of 30 years ago, and they're all coming up to retirement at the same time. There's sort of this great cohort of GPs, particularly in the inner cities, whose children are often doctors but don't want to take over the surgery from dad or mum. And we have a massive, massive workforce crisis in general practice, but particularly in deprived multi-ethnic parts of the inner cities. And that, so if we, and one of the things we haven't actually brought in yet, which we need to bring in, is that in the last month, the vaccine for COVID issue has moved from being a chemical, a biochemical and an immunological challenge to being a social and political and to some extent cultural challenge, in that we seem to have a number of vaccines now on the menu that are effective and safe. And we can argue about how effective and how safe, but put that aside, we now have a challenge of how are we going to cover the population. So that's partly about vaccine hesitancy, but it is also about the social determinants of population coverage with a vaccine. So a few years ago, we did some work around the hepatitis vaccines and the uptake in particular ethnic communities in particular parts of London. And I can tell you that from that work, different groups have different reasons for not being able or not ending up being vaccinated. Sometimes it's because of access, sometimes it's a language issue, sometimes it's an understanding and folk model issue. So we have to, I think we've got a small paper coming out in the Lancet in the next few days about this. It's like a long letter. We have to engage with communities. We have to work locally between primary care, public health, but also the third sector, faith organizations, all that kind of thing. This has got to be a big job. Now, the problem is there aren't enough GPs. General practice is underfunded. They're still struggling with dealing with wave 2 of the virus. So, you know, this is an infrastructure problem. And I have no easy answers to it. I have no easy answers, but I am still clamoring for general practice to be moved into the center of this rather than put at the margins somehow, because there's two separate problems. Should general practice be involved, and is general practice adequately funded? You can't answer one without also thinking about the other.
Fair enough. Walter, in Italy, you, as you can see, I've been stalking you. You've also been talking about problems of the workforce, partly caused by illness, partly caused by tiredness and fatigue. How will you deliver a mass vaccine program in Italy?
We are planning to do that via the different possibilities. First of all, of course, there is a logistic difference between the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca, because the Pfizer has the limitation of the cold chain and minus 75 degrees. So essentially, we are agreeing to be this vaccine delivered to approximately 300 different places in Europe, so where they can be distributed. And of course, this is very much limited to hospitals, military organization, and so on. When it concerns the AstraZeneca, which is the other vaccine, we are seriously thinking about involving GPs in the distribution. So I think that we will use both the hospital, local health authorities, and GPs. This is going to be the approach.
And when do you anticipate that will start?
Possibly in January. So the minister is going on December 2 to describe the plan to the parliament. And we are expecting the first doses in January. We will have approximately 3 million doses, and that will start.
Okay. Well, let's move on. Still on vaccines at the last bit. Another thing that was asked a lot of at least two of our speakers that we never got into at all is this issue of anti-vax and whether or not it's a problem or not. So I wonder if, I don't know who wants to kick off on this one, Peter, maybe it's your turn to start. But first of all, do we think that anti-vaxxers, or whatever we're going to call it, the anti-vax campaign, is seriously going to impede progress towards a population solution?
I think, to me, a major problem is all the fake news that's coming out on social media, and how to counter that is the key issue. I do think it's one of the major reasons that we need to make sure that we get proper information out to the public, is that we need to, make that available, make information available based on the true scientific knowledge and the results of trials. We need to make sure that that is available to people so that they can listen to a sort of voice of reason, as well as
you mean
as
you?
Well as well. So, but it is a real uphill struggle, and I must say that it's very rewarding when you do engage with somebody who is undecided, and you manage to get them at the end of the conversation to come around to say, "Great, I now understand. Thank you." That's a real triumph, I think.
True.
Once people have fallen into the dark pit of misinformation and myth, it's very hard to get them to climb out again. I think we need a lot more work on trying to discover how it is that people do fall into those pits in the first place, because once they're down there, very hard to get them out.
I think in kind of sociological study, that's sometimes called pre-bunking, isn't it, as opposed to debunking. But I think the time for pre-bunking is probably past now. I don't know. But Trish, what do you think? You still there, Trish?
Sorry, I've muted myself. Yeah, I was teasing Simon for being muted before we went live. There we go, he's got me back. I've just responded to someone in the chat. I think it was, can't remember who it was, sorry. And I've put a link to an article that came out today in The Conversation about this topic. So the first thing that the article says is, most of the people who are hesitating to have a vaccine are not anti-vaxxers. And that's precisely what this person was saying in the chat, that they have probably quite legitimate concerns. This is new, it's been rapidly developed, there's several different ones. How at risk are we? What's the balance of benefits and harms? So the anti-vaxxers are probably not worth your efforts too much, but they're a tiny, tiny proportion. The vaccine hesitancy people are a different group, and they need well, scientific facts would be a good start, wouldn't it? But then actually the article also makes the point about pre-bunking, what they call inoculating, which I think is an interesting word, against misinformation. So getting out the notion that there are a lot of anti-vax memes out there, and get people alert to thinking, is this someone trying to influence me with lies, with conspiracy theories and things like that. And it's a bit like the way I've managed to train one of my elderly relatives to spot the scams. And then there's clear debunking efforts that we can all do, and actually we're still not that good at slipping out of our jargon and into sort of short sentences, that kind of thing. But the other thing the article talks about is the language we use, and it uses the example of herd immunity versus community immunity. I mean, do you think of yourself as a member of a herd or a member of a community? And maybe if we stopped using these shorthand terms that are value laden, we might get across. I think the other thing is there will be pictures of prominent politicians and celebrities having that jab. And if we all remember the Leo Blair story,
yes,
of whether
yes.
or not that child was immunized, and if so, what he had. And of course, it's none of anyone's business, but actually a picture of somebody who's got a lot of credibility and appeal having that jab, And hopefully I'm going to be one of those, actually. I've already told the Oxford vaccine people, when you're ready, I'm quite happy to roll up my sleeve and go on the telly.
Well, that's 100,000 Twitter followers then, done. Excellent. But let's not talk about Cornelia and the hamburger. Okay, Walter, anything on this?
Yeah, I completely agree with Peter and Trish. In Italy, we have the experience of having reintroduced mandatory vaccination in 2017 for 10 vaccination for children. And it was extremely successful because essentially what Trish said about the percentage of anti-vaxxers is no more than 2-3%, but they, of course, biased 20-30% of the population which were hesitant. When we reintroduce mandatory vaccination, we somehow oblige parents to go to vaccination services to discuss with the doctors and with vaccine people, and most of them were relaxed about the fact that we're correctly informed. So it's no more than, and we caught up in less than a year, the community immunity, I wouldn't say herd immunity, higher than 95%. So this is a major success for children. When it comes to adult population, I think we have to work for convince and promote that, not to oblige them to do. I think we can do that if we do as Peter and Trish said.
Okay, now let's move on a little then. And Trish, with you here, obviously last time you were on, you talked a lot about masks, and there's a little bit more now to say today. I think we'll just tackle one particular topic, but there's a new trial out called Dan Mask. Actually, that sounds like a superhero, doesn't it? Dan Mask. Anyway, which has been creating some waves, suggesting that masks may have been overhyped. Is this true or false? Are you still with us, Trish, or are you still answering?
Yeah, sorry, I've been muted again. Personally, I have serious concerns about that particular randomized controlled trial. I also have concerns about the possibility of doing an RCT of masks for the purpose of reducing the incidence of COVID-19 in a population. I should say I am actually principal investigator on an RCT of masks, where we're actually getting medical students to wear different kinds of masks and run around the park and see what happens to their oxygen levels and their exercise tolerance, whether they're wearing a cloth mask or a respirator mask. So I'll just say that I am not opposed to randomized controlled trials of masks in protecting the wearer, but that isn't going to answer the question, which is, should we have masking mandates or masking recommendations in order to control the spread of COVID-19? Now, the Dan Mask study was a study of masks in protecting the wearer. And the people who ran that trial did not mention source control, which is, in other words, protecting other people, until a reviewer told them that they really needed to mention the caveat that the role of masks in source control was not being tested in that study. Now, I was that reviewer and the sentence went into the paper, but I'm not sure they realized this really crucial error, not necessarily error that they made, but it's not an error if what you want to know is, should I wear a mask to protect me? But it's certainly an error if you're trying to conclude nobody should wear a mask in the current circumstances.
Do you think it did suggest, though, in terms of protecting you? I mean, whatever information
in terms of protecting the wearer, there's many problems with this study, but perhaps one of the main problems was how they measured the incidence of new cases of COVID-19. Now, they used several methods and they kind of combined them all. So it didn't matter whether your swab went positive or your antibody went positive, or you simply were clinically diagnosed. So it was a composite outcome measure. And I think that's fine. I don't think there were any cases of purely clinically diagnosed COVID. There were 5 cases of swab positive COVID that came up, and they were all in the control group. So there were no cases of swab positive COVID in the mask group. So that's the first thing. But what about the antibody test, which was actually what most of the cases were diagnosed with? The antibody test is on what we call the removed list of the US Food and Drug Administration. Now, why it was removed, we're not quite clear, but probably because the FDA didn't think it was very accurate. Now, that test, if you look at the paperwork on the test, does not become positive for 17 days after the person has become infected. So if I start wearing my mask on day 1, and then I get infected on day 2, the antibody test isn't going to become positive until day 19, but people only wore the masks for 30 days. In other words, for more than half of the intervention period, the antibody test couldn't possibly have become positive because it's too, do you see what I mean? So most of the infections incurred in either group during the intervention period would not have been picked up until after they stopped testing. So there are these very, very basic design errors in that trial. Now, just as an overarching comment on that trial, if I was going to do an RCT, I would get involved with a clinical trials unit. CTUs are the people to go to when you're designing a study. There was no involvement of a CTU. And so I think what they've got is the wrong endpoints, the wrong intervention period. You know, the study has not been designed properly, and you can't conclude anything.
Okay, so I think we can conclude, Trish. It's
compatible with a very strong effect in protecting the wearer.
So I think this is what we call a cautious welcome, then, isn't it? Okay. All right. I think you've done that very, very well. Now, Peter is desperate to talk about his PhD in respiratory physiology, which is related to this, but I think we are a bit running out of time. So I just want to bring up one more point, and then we'll finish. It's a question that was asked, and it's simply this about, and it leads to my last question as well. This is for all of us, really. Somebody asked Jeremy Farah, how can we get back into society and contribute to our economy, which is in dire straits? And it says, surely we have to take risks. And we could ask this about all sorts of other things, not just the economy as well. But let's end with just a short thing about your views on at what point do we start taking, are we allowed to make choices and take more risks? At what point does that balance shift towards a greater ability for us to take risks, I think is what they're asking. Who would like, who's Walter, do you want to talk as a public health official about the balance of individual risks and when we would get to the stage where we'll start to take more attention of those than we are doing at the moment?
Actually, I've been in contact with many scientific advisors, for instance, to the one that is advising Macron or Angela Merkel. We were extremely frustrated in trying to make these people understanding that there cannot be economy unless we are safe from the healthcare point of view. And of course, whenever you reach a certain level of the epidemic curve, you have to keep control. I mean, if you look at the figures, the drop in the GDP is exactly the same in some countries that we had during World War II. I mean, for instance, 2020 for Italy will be the same as 1943. But then we are not discussing about the economy of war. We are discussing, do we have to open the ski resorts? You know, that's the kind of discussion that we have, because the lobby of ski resorts is pushing to reopen. And this is not only Italy, it's in Austria and Switzerland, you know, that's the kind of discussion. So we have to help politicians to shape the discussion in a different way. We are in an economy of war. We have to act consequently. We cannot be complacent, you know. We have to speak openly and we have to work with all the stakeholders.
Okay, Peter, on that.
So I think there is an argument for managing our own risks. You know, if we understand properly, you know, what are the benefits of wearing a mask and keeping distance and washing our hands, then, you know, we should be attending to those. Whatever the rules are, we should be making sure that we're not exposing ourselves to undue risk. And I think that understanding those risks, rather than just looking at the rule book and trying to work out what the hell it means, is what we have to do to some extent. I also think that we need to have a sort of risk-based approach in terms of moving towards vaccination. You know, once once the data has been properly scrutinized and it's been through the regulators, to my mind, we need to put aside our sort of doubts and concerns and feelings about vaccines and just go for it, because I don't think there's any other way out of this other than to get on with the vaccines. And,
okay.
Yeah.
So on that quote, we now have a little natural experiment we can therefore play about what your choices of risks are going to be, because we will have a period coming up over Christmas. So Walter, first of all, are you getting Natale off in Italy? Is there going to be exceptions made?
We are discussing. Of course, we are pushing for not reopening and to taking very seriously the issue. We know, as in UK, I guess in Italy, we are a Catholic country, and Christmas is traditionally the moment in which a family gathers, and we are, of course, warning that this is not going to be possible. It's going to be tough, but I think we will go on.
Okay. What about you, Trish? What are you going to? We do know what our rules are going to be. What's your personal take on? I think I know because I think you've tweeted it, but share with us.
I tweeted yesterday. I have a 94-year-old mother who may not be around for that much longer. I think a lot of people are going through this. Could this be the last Christmas that I see my elderly relative? It's not just do we defer it till next year. I'm not going to be visiting my mother, and she's not going to be visiting me because I think it's not just, there will be a massive spike in cases after people travel all over the country to gather together. Boris Johnson cannot control the infectivity of the virus. And so this allowing people to go meet their families is not a scientific decision, it's a political one and a very partisan one. So there will be a spike in cases. And I think, without a doubt, people will die. And then people will have to live for the rest of their lives with the suspicion that they have passed on the virus that killed their mum or dad. That's what's going to happen.
Okay.
And I don't want to do that.
Well, that's fair enough. I think politicians finally do exist to make political decisions. I have to say that. But Peter, what about you? What's happening in the Openshaw household? I think I know as well, but share us.
So it's quite a mixed household. I'm desperately trying to work out how I can actually see my grandchildren, my children, without putting myself at risk. And I don't think they want to put me at risk either. So, staying out of doors and well-ventilated areas, wearing a mask, and, there won't be any kissing and hugging, but I hope to be able to eyeball them safely. All
right. So I think we're going to stop at that point, and certainly there may not be kissing and hugging, but there's certainly going to be broad smiles in the Openshaw household from what we're hearing, and indeed from all of you. And I think that you've all have helped a lot in creating a little bit of speranza that we all need at the moment. Now, just stay with me for 1 second. I have to tell everyone, first of all, this was brought by the Royal Society of Medicine. And again, as ever, we do rely on your support because we're not getting much else support at the moment. So if you're feeling generous, now is the time as we approach Christmas to be generous. This time next week, it is vaccines again. And this time, but it's Dr. Maheshi Ramasamy, who is the principal investigator at the Oxford Vaccine Group, and therefore clearly a busy man. And also, I hopefully will be beaming as well. And in our evening conversation next week, it'll be Mervyn King, Baron King of Lothbury. I love that. It's cool to be a Baron King, isn't it? That's just kind of overdoing it. But anyway, he's a governor of the Bank of England for 10 years, and I bet he's glad he isn't a governor now when it's actually empty. So don't forget those 2 dates for your diary. And then back to our panel. What a brilliant panel. Peter, I don't know if you noticed, this is actually our 50th anniversary. You came in on our second of these webinars, and now you're here on our 52nd. So well done for having a 50th anniversary. Thank you so much, Trish, once again, being as bright and illuminating and occasionally provocative as you are, and more power to that. And Walter, wonderful to meet you. And I do hope we will be able to call on your services again, because again, it was a great to meet you, and you were very, very clear, and we can see that I know, things that Italy, at least at the science level, is in great hands. Everybody, thank you very much. And we will meet again. Maybe one day we'll have a webinar in person. Wouldn't that be great? Goodbye all. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.